Wordslinger's Way. My name is Cisco. I'm an author. I write mostly Afrofuturism, which is science fiction, through a specific lens. But my last book, The Unbanished, which reached #1 on a few charts, thanks to great folks like you, was my first foray into fantasy. Some folks have been calling it Afro-fantasy, but I want to have a slightly broader definition. And so the reason why I call this full-color fantasy, first off, they're a little bit loud. Can everybody hear me? No. I'm sorry. I will try and speak around the applause. And we can also do like the old New York City style. Legs. Alright. Yes, if I say anything and you don't get it, just raise a hand and then I'll try and pause and we can try and backtrack. But again, thanks for coming out. So with fantasy, there's usually a few tropes, right? And one of the things that I like to do personally, whether it's writing or just interacting, is not to just talk. Any kids here? I don't like to talk shit. I'm an old school fella, a little bit older school than I like to think about sometimes. But I prefer to, we had something called put up or shut up. And so, because a lot of fantasy, I wasn't opposed to it, but I was always solidly on the science fiction side of the sci-fi fantasy split. And the reason for that is, with respect to all the other great authors and writers out there doing stuff, is because a lot of it felt like J.R.R. Tolkien fanfic. It's like, yes, it's cool to see pseudo-European dudes riding horses with swords, killing dragons, but once you've seen that, do we really need to see it again and again and again and again? And I decided, no, I like the Arthurian legends, they're cool. Who doesn't like dragons? Who doesn't love Queen Cersei trying to protect her kingdom from the tyranny of the evil Daenerys Targaryen? But we've seen that story. Yeah, I saw some version. She's the bad guy in that story. And there's a lot of surprise around the end of Game of Thrones, especially in the television version, where they're like, it came out of nowhere. It's like, well, season 2, she said she was going to take all her shit back with fire and blood. And then at the end, she took all her shit back with fire and blood, so it should not have been that big of a surprise. But I decided to stop talking trash about fantasy, and I wanted to write fantasy, and I tried to think about what would I want to see in fantasy, because fantasy means, by definition, fantastical. There's no limits, but we have these weird constraints where everything is pseudo-European. There's always, usually male, the chosen one, and he's going to use his sword. Inexplicably, that sword, no matter what technology he's up against, that's going to be the old way is the best way. And no matter how smart they present their protagonist, he's always at some point going to have to get his hands dirty and murder some people. Lots of people. Usually brown people or stand-ins and allegories for brown people. But I thought, you know what would be cool? Let's not have a dude murder people. In fact, let's not have our hero murder anyone at all. Actually, let's have our hero be a pacifist. Because I personally am a pacifist, and I thought it'd be cool to see us pacifists get some more love. Just because we don't fight and kill doesn't mean that we're less awesome. It doesn't, trust me. That was a really pregnant pause. So make sure you all come with me. And also, the Arthurian thing, I get it. England used to own most of the planet. It's fine. You know who else did? Khan Noonien Sun. In the Star Trek canon, he used to own 25% of the planet. It's not a good dude. We shouldn't be writing fanfic about Khan. Ricardo Montalban's chest, that's another story. But, yeah. So I was like, there's other cultures. In fact, the entire continent of Africa, there are hundreds of countries, thousands of cultures throughout history that have their own unique stories and things like that. And also because of the influence of colonialism and outsiders showing up where they shouldn't be with fancy guns and weapons and that kind of thing, we have influences from them as well. And it wasn't just England who was doing the colonizing. There are other countries that are cool now that just don't like to talk about what happened in the past. They're sort of like Worf, and I realize I'm dropping a lot of Star Trek references. I think it's the cosplay. But yes, if you're unfamiliar, there's a character named Worf in Star Trek Next Generation, also Star Trek DC9, and spoiler, he'll be in Picard Season 4 for some reason. But they ask, why do Klingons look different? It's like, we don't talk about that. And it's the same thing. It's like, why do so many people in Cameroon speak French? Well, French, we don't talk about that. Don't worry. It's just a happy accident. Weird coincidence. So drawing on some of those, I decided to write a book called The Unbanished, and that was my foray into fantasy about Oriane Duchamp, who is a young lady who is a pacifist. She's extremely academic, but she ends up finding herself in a situation where she has to go on a quest, because there are certain genre conventions that still must be upheld in order for it to stay in that genre. But I try to play with it. Also, the antagonist. So usually in fantasy, who's the antagonist? Super evil, very easy, right? They murder tons of people. sometimes turn themselves into giant flaming eyeballs, which seems like a very inconvenient and inefficient way to run an army of orcs, but you know, the 1920s were a different time. But I wanted more shades of gray. And to illustrate, I also wanted to draw on something besides Arthurian legend. So I grew up in Chicago. And in Chicago, people who look like me were not supposed to be in things like fantasy and sci-fi. Like right now, you hear geeks of our age, pretty much like our age in general, like in mass, certain types of folks that are complaining, like, you go to Target, you can get fucking Naruto t-shirts. Oh, that's so stupid. I hate the fact that I can just go online to Amazon and just find lunch boxes and diapers and baseball caps. I'm like, shut the fuck up. You know what we had to do to get just a shitty t-shirt that just had the logo of our character on it? And sometimes you had to make it yourself. Fun fact, I saw Doctor Who's episode, Paradise Towers, in the late 80s. It was the first Doctor Who episode I ever saw. It blew my mind. Sylvester McCoy was my first Doctor. He used to wear a question mark vest. Well, we didn't have Etsy back then. We also didn't have, well, the internet, really. So I had to make my own question mark vest, because I was like, I'm gonna go to school on Monday, and those kids are gonna see how fucking cool I am. They did not think that was very cool. Not even a little bit. Yes, I apologize, I will slow down just a bit. It's that Chicago part. So in Chicago, like in Minnesota, the cool thing is everyone's kind of laid back, very polite, and everything is like, you know, over there. Like, oh, how you doing there? Like, oh, what you got there? Going up to see the folks out and about, all that stuff. Chicago, everything's over here, and it's very fast and low and outside your mouth. Like, what are you doing over here? What am I, a fucking asshole over here? That's a Chicago thing. I also love linguistics, and I play with that a little bit in my books too, especially because like when I first moved here, quite a long time ago, this thing I still don't get over is the ramp situation. Like, I'm used to driving up the ramp to get to the parking garage. So when I moved here, it's like, oh, where's the parking? Don't worry about it, it's downtown, but there's a ramp you can park in. It's like, no, you don't park in the ramp, you use the ramp to get to where you park. But, you know, it's better than Wisconsin, just, you know, bubblers, what the fuck is that? It's insane. Also, fuck Wisconsin. Just in general. No offense if anyone's from Wisconsin. Actually, all the offense. What are you doing in Wisconsin? Get out of here. Move, we got interstates now. You can leave whenever you want. So this example, read excerpt from The Unbanished. Oh, I do have copies, and they are pay what you can, if at all. So I write because I like to express. I'd rather have 1 million people read it that paid $0 as opposed to have 10 people read it that paid 10, 20, 30. I want to get my work out there, because if a tree falls in the woods and there's no one there to hear it, who gives a fuck? Right? Also, what's wrong with that tree that's just randomly fallen over in the woods? It probably shouldn't have been up in the first place. I'm losing this allegory. Ignore it. We're gonna start from the beginning. So in this section, I know I'm supposed to set up the excerpts like traditional authors, but we've got about an hour together. My books are kind of short, and you don't want to hear me read this entire thing to you. I know I seem like kind of a slightly charismatic, mildly attractive fella if you don't have your glasses on, it's still pretty early, and you're hungover. Yeah. This looks great. The pandemic, the one good thing, covering 70% of my face, oh my God, I'm a fucking knockout. But in this excerpt, we're gonna meet two shellskins, which was an actual profession that we believe, or anthropologists believe, was around 2,000 years ago or so. But basically, they would trade skins for shells. They were what we would consider modern day assassins nowadays. But my two, they have a little bit of banter, and they're bored on their way to a rendezvous when they decide to tell, one of them decides to tell the other a story. And so rather than borrowing from the Arthurian legend of like a boy pulling a sword out of a rock or catching it from a strange lady, by the way, why are ladies throwing swords at kids? That's... Right. Well, that would be fine. If it was just a young lady lying in a pond, and she's like, hey dude, you want a sword? That's cool. But in every story, you know, Arthur walks up to the edge of the wood, there's a light and all that other stuff happens, and there's a sword that comes flying and he catches it. Don't throw swords. That is super dangerous. Especially in the medieval days, there's like no doctors. They're like, oh man, what happened? Like a lady threw a sword at me, I got cut. Like, I put a leech on you, you're good. So this excerpt, Kyrian, Le Bourgeois, and Marie, they are en route, and I'll read the excerpt and then I'll kind of explain a little bit afterwards. You might pick up some familiar elements because some of the cool thing about humans in general is that we actually are the same species. A lot of assholes will tell you that like, no, it's like we're the superior race. We're the superior race, everyone sucks. Like actually we're all kind of assholes, some of us are kind of cool. It's a hodgepodge, it's like a bag of Skittles. But not like that racist guy said we're a bag of Skittles, like a good bag of Skittles. We're kind of like the tropical flavor Skittles. Yeah, not the sour Skittles, those are no good. I mean, no offense, but if you like sour Skittles, you probably kicked the puppy on purpose. That's no good. Yeah, it's all right. Didn't mean to call you out, but stop kicking puppies, it's no good. I'm so bored. Also, because I'm an indie author, I don't read the right way. I know I'm supposed to give you these deep insights and like be very, very serious and poignant because we're about to share some artistic expression. But I write these because they're fun, and so I like to have fun. And so I also didn't get formal training in how to be an author, which I don't think exists, unfortunately. Someone should start that school. I'll start that school. Find me on Fiverr. For $5, I will teach you the official author skill set. You get a jacket, because we need uniforms, right? You need sunglasses, cup of tea. My mic keeps moving. It's a little bit of Viagra over here. I'm so bored, Marie sighed. Remind me again why we agreed to meet so close to the border of Terdos. Well, because by taking bigger risks, we'll be able to reap larger rewards, Kirian retorted, casting a look over his shoulder at Marie. Neither of us was content chasing goat thieves and adulterers along the eastern coast. The truth, Marie conceded. I just didn't realize we'd have to go so far. Well, dangerous people tend to reside in dangerous places. Why don't you tell me a story to pass the time? Well, what do you want to hear? Kirian replied as Marie carefully moved from the back of the cart, climbing over the railing and taking a seat next to him. How about something with trickery and bloodshed? Marie smiled. Something to set the mood for our upcoming rendezvous at Filet Noir. Trickery and bloodshed. Kirian thought for a moment. Have I told you the fable of Vadim? A fable? Marie's smile faded. I'm not sure a morality tale will spark my bloodlust. Well, this one might. Kirian smiled confidently, reclined back in his wooden seat, and began the story. Many generations ago, there was a beautiful man named Vadim Anaheb. Now, Vadim possessed a brilliant mind. However, everyone he encountered was thoroughly enchanted by his beauty. It was more than a pleasing face. His appearance was grand, but he also possessed a natural gift for connecting with people. Vadim dreamed of becoming a Skinner. He wanted to be seen as courageous and tough, not compassionate, and definitely not beautiful. So, during the ritual of Shua in Avenir, Vadim declared his intent to join the Vank, but the mentors placed him with the Unir stratum. So he traveled to Courbon, and after much convincing, was able to gain an audience with the Gold Chieftain, though his meeting was limited to 3 questions. For his first question, Vadim asked to join the Vank and was denied. For his second question, he asked to serve the Queen Mothers of Tolabella. That would allow him to remain in close proximity to the leadership of the Vank while still serving the Unir. The Gold Chieftain denied him again. With one question left, Vadim realized he would have to change his approach. And for his final question, he asked for an ear of corn. An ear of corn, Marie exclaimed. Yes, a single ear of corn. Let me continue. Vadim knew that the chieftain needed servants to tend to the needs of the elders and other matters of Courbon, so Vadim asked if he could take the ear of corn and return a few nights later with 100 servants. Then, would he be allowed to join the Vank? The chieftain wasn't immune to Vadim's charms, and was in fact in need of servants, so he agreed to the terms and gave Vadim a single ear of corn. Vadim wrapped the ear of corn in a fine ribbon and set off. After a couple of nights, he came across a village. He told the village elder that he was on a mission to deliver a special ear of corn to the chieftain and requested a special place to sleep for the night. The village elder agreed and treated Vadim as an honored guest. During the night, while all the villagers were asleep, Vadim fed the ear of corn to the village elder's chickens, leaving the fine ribbon in the coop. The next morning, Vadim accused the village elder of being negligent in the care of his chickens. The village elder begged him to take 10 chickens as an apology. Vadim accepted, collected his ribbon and his chickens, and set off. Vadim arrived at another village. Before he entered, he wrapped the ribbon around one of the chickens' necks. He told the village queen mother that he was on a mission for the chieftain and requested a place to store his special chickens for the night. Just like the first village, Vadim was treated as an honored guest. During the night, Vadim butchered the chickens and smeared their blood and feathers on the door of the queen mother's house, leaving the ribbon on the step. The next morning, he accused the queen mother of slaughtering the chickens and threatened to bring the wrath of the chieftain down upon the village. The queen mother begged Vadim to take 50 tri-horn goats as an apology. Vadim accepted, collected his ribbon and his goats, and set off. Vadim drove the tri-horn goats down the road. After a while, He came to a group of old men carrying a corpse. He asked them whose body they were carrying, and they replied that they had found it on the shore and were taking it inland for burial. Vadim offered to complete the burial if they would take his goats. Well, the old men happily accepted the offer. As the old men counted the goats, Vadim withdrew his dagger and sliced their throats, spilling their dark blood on his cloak. Vadim covered the corpse in the old men's clothes and carried it on his back. Soon, he reached the beaches between Corbon and Novanka. Arriving at that port city, he told the Domini that the person he was carrying was none other than Bashar Ahmad Jalal, the estranged, yet still beloved, cousin of the chieftain. Vadim said Bashar had been badly injured, but with rest, would make a full recovery. Vadim gripped the bloody cloak and told the Domini that they had been attacked by visitant marauders. Vadim requested a place to rest, and like the previous villages, Vadim was treated as an honored guest. Late at night, Vadim snuck into the regal chambers and stole one of the Domini's bejeweled bracelets. When morning came, Vadim asked the people to help him wake Bashar. The villagers beat drums and banged on pots, but Bashar would not awaken. Vadim tore away the ribbon, revealing the face of a corpse who was undeniably dead. From the bedside, he presented the Domini's bracelet and accused the Domini of murder. The villagers seized the Domini, bound him in irons, and dashed him against the jagged rocks along the coast of the estuary. They begged Vadim to return to Corbon and plead the chieftain for mercy. Vadim agreed on the condition that they offer up 100 of their best youths to serve the chieftain as penance for the Domini's heinous crime. They eagerly agreed to those terms and fetched the strongest, most accomplished youths and presented them to Vadim. Vadim returned to Corbon and presented the youths to the gold chieftain. The chieftain was so impressed, he granted Vadim's request to join the Vank and offered Vadim the title of Skinner. But Vadim declined. He realized that his ability to turn a single ear of corn into 100 servants was irrefutable proof that he was a naturally gifted politician. His talents would undeniably be best utilized right there in Corbon with the Unir strand. So that story, as fun and silly as it is not entirely mine. It's a variation on similar stories that I've heard as a child where you're taking one thing and then you're making it into something much larger, much more valuable. And this actually appears in lots of cultures. However, it doesn't really often occur in fantasy, or at least a lot of the more popular tropish fantasy. And so those are kind of elements where this now is presenting a side of our own culture out or back to us in a way that is familiar yet different. And that's really what it's about, because fantasy, like science fiction, is really just a reflection of what we are, what we're doing, but said in a way that's a little bit easier. Like if I meet someone and they're like, hey, just to let you know, yes, you do kind of look like on a scale of 1 to 10, like a -40, but that's not what it's about. You're a nice guy, it's just, I don't date Negroes. It's like, oh, cool, that's super racist. And they're like, no, it's not racist, it's a preference. It's like, okay, all right, check this out. I'm gonna read you a story. And then they'll read the story, like, oh my God, I'm a fucking asshole. That was super racist. By the way, that's a true story. It's in another one of my books. Because I like to pull from life, because I heard you're supposed to write what you know, life imitates art, etc., etc. So I was young, swinging single, and my friends are assholes. It's okay, because I'm kind of an asshole too, so it'd be weird if I didn't hang out with other assholes. They were like, we're gonna set you up on a date. And I was like, great. And so I met this person, and they were really, really sweet. We went out, had a good time. I said, we should do this again. And they were like, yeah, we should do this again. So we did it again. Next time, did it 3 more times. On the 5th time, we're going out. I was like, there's no expectations, but maybe you should go back to my place. We could have like a grown-up slumber party. This is before Netflix and chill. We just had the show part. It wasn't very chill. It was very hot and sticky and icky. We didn't get to that part because they told me that they didn't date inwards. Yes, this actually happened. And I was like, oh, what? They said, yeah, you're nice, you're super polite, we had a good time, but I can't date an N-word. And I was like, cool, you need to stop saying that word. Also, this is like our 5th date, what are you talking about? And they explained to me that they wanted to date me because they had found out that most people, they read something that said most people tend to date within their own racial groups, and they didn't want to be seen as a bigot. And I was like, oh, you're a special kind of stupid. Yeah, so that's a true story. It's a fun one. Oh, it's fine, because I went back to my friends like, hey, what the hell, man? They're kind of racist. They're like, oh yeah, they're totally racist. I was like, well, what do you know? Like, we didn't know you go over there a bunch of times. Like, she was really cute. And she said, yes, of course. Yeah. I mean, it wasn't like, I used to have this terrible joke This is fun. Hey, Art, how's it going? You've heard this one before, but it's kind of true that I watched the movie Roots at the same time as I had my first nocturnal emission, so I was becoming sexually aware and racially aware at the same time, except having those two events happen at the same time just like is not a good combination. So I was having weird kind of like S&M things, like, what's your name? It's like, oh, Toby, yes. That is so wrong, and I double dare all of you to tell that joke in your office on Monday. It's okay, tell them the guy in the Star Trek suit told you to say it over the weekend. It'll be perfectly fine. Yeah, I'm getting way too personal here. I think it's having a microphone and a picture of myself next to me. It feels like I should be pouring out all these terrible secrets. I'm actually much better now. I used to have that, I moved to Minnesota a while ago, and I was like, wow, the women here, because I'm age-injured or whatever, but I can still tell, like, hot is hot, and, like, the women here are, like, top shelf. I don't know if you guys know this, and this is definitely objectifying, but just purely from aesthetics, like an appreciation of artistic, biological forms. It's like Minnesota and then, like, nothing. Like, Midwest, and you're smart, too. Fantastic, like so hot in fact that I would let you call me the N-word twice, depending on the context. If you're like, hey, N-word, get over here. Like, what did you say? Like, do you want to spend the night? Like, oh, yeah, sorry. No, that is terrible. Don't call me the N-word. It doesn't matter how hot you are. But definitely try it. There's a neighborhood in Minneapolis on like Broadway and Lyndale. You should go over there and try that. Yeah, a lot of fellas. It's and I'm busting chops. I know you're like, man, you make a lot of race jokes. Some of my best friends are white people in college. They used to call me white girl. Not just because I like PSLs and Jamba Juice, but you are what you eat. So there's, not like a Jeffrey Dahmer way. Come on, I'm talking more about like Long John Silver's. I like seafood. This is going horribly wrong. I need to get this back on track really quickly. So in talking about cultures, by borrowing that particular story, I wanted to also borrow other elements that were a lot more relatable and a little bit more on the nose. Because sometimes, like Star Trek, for example, you hear sometimes Star Trek fans saying like, oh, it's so dark now, it's too woke. So yes, Star Trek is political. Has been since 1966. And they've been getting more and more blatant because people are stupid. And so knowing that some people are stupid, I try to be a little bit more blatant in some of the other excerpts. So this is another scene where Oriane, our champion, our protagonist, has encountered the Doyen of the Farfadets. So if you're not familiar, so you've heard of dragons, you've heard of fairies. Anybody know like Farfadets? No? So Farfadets are kind of like fairies, but they're furry, look more like demons. They have horns, they're awesome. It's like if a dragon, a gremlin, and a fairy had a baby. I don't know how that works, that's one too many in the mix, but they would get a Farfadet. And I was like, there's not enough Farfadets. So she's met the leader of the Farfadets, who, for the purposes of this book, is able to do some like telekinesis, mind melding, kind of cool stuff. And she's showing Oriane that what she's been told about her history is not entirely correct. And the history in here is fictional, but see if you can spot some elements here, like, huh, that sounds kind of familiar. In her entranced state, Oriane found herself transported. The voice of the Doyen blew through her ears like soft, warm winds over the planting season, narrating the scenes playing out before her eyes. Though the account was familiar, there was much more that Oriane had never before heard or witnessed. The gulf between determination and delirium is both infinite and invisible. The poetry of the damned often falls on deaf ears. The will of a people may echo for miles without answer, but faith can only be deemed folly in the hindsight of forfeit. 7,000 generations ago, the progenitors labored tirelessly to build a thriving civilization. The results of their onerous burden took root and spread to the furthest shores. Man, maybe I should do this like a normal author. It's a little hard to turn the pages with one hand. Through procreation and exploration, they blanketed the lush and fruitful continent. They named their world Javari in tribute to the Queen Chief Savon Fugia Javari, the fallen matriarch who freed them from bondage, braved the endless depths of the freshwater ocean, and led them through the unfathomable to set foot upon their new homelands. Tens of thousands of nights passed as they matured and prospered, building a complex and relatively equitable society. For the first few hundred generations, they lived in benevolent harmony with the mystical indigenous creatures, all of whom were wondrous and beautifully necessary to the prosperity of the land in their own distinctive ways. The Kongamado gave them meat and building materials. They learned what crops to eat, what fields to plow, and how to safely avoid the hazards of the cacals and the carcoals. They learned to forge weapons and build ships. They mastered the strategies of conquest by studying the hunting tactics of the Gabali and the migration patterns of the Leviathans. But it was my kind the Farfadets, who guided them in the ways of immingling with the space between the miraculous and the mundane to develop the necessary skills to lead the preternatural abilities of the magics. Then the visitants arrived. They came from across the oceans, traveling some 91 nights. They sought to empower themselves in the name of their cursed homelands. The lands from which they came possessed few natural resources, but nowhere near the abundant array of plants and animals, of fine minerals and raw materials. They were also wholly devoid of preternatural knowledge and had no comprehension in the true power of the magics. The visitants carried with them strange armaments and advanced technologies, but their deadliest weapon was unseen to the progenitors. There was a pox in their blood, one for which there was no remedy, and one that threatened to decimate not only the stricken visitants, but all life on Javari. The bronze, iron, and gold chieftains, the Hall of Elders, along with the queen mothers and mentors from all the regions, also the beings from Air-Solth gathered to discuss the visitant issue. They didn't want to let them die, but at the same time could not endanger their own people. They decided that the visitants, with their frail biology, ignorance of natural ways, and crippling foreign sickness, could stay in the coastal region along the southern border, just a few nights' journey north of Navanka. The visitants agreed, thankful for the merciful generosity of the Javari people. And at first, the arrangement worked. The visitants stayed in their area, receiving instructions on how to work the land, grow food, build shelter. Emissaries from their enclave were allowed to travel to other regions to learn necessary skills, but the emissaries would return to their enclaves with stories of the splendor of other regions. And after 2 generations, the visitants became covetous. They gazed upon the magnificent people of Tolabella and Ardwood, Navanka, and Courbon and devised plans to conquer the continent. The visitants sent word back to their homelands, and over the next 500 nights, thousands of visitants began arriving. This time, they bore astonishing weapons of war and exotic beasts of battle. They attempted to take the organic riches of Javari for themselves, planning to extend their invasive empire, enslave and exterminate the people, and exploit the abilities of the magical beings. The progenitors partnered with the magical creatures and defeated the visitant forces. The survivors were exiled to a narrow band of land between Terdos and Terre de Song, but it was far from the coastal waters and regularly beset upon by precoats and carcols. Even when the monsters were held at bay, the terrain itself was suitable for little more than basic survival and necessary sustenance, but the alternative was death. The exile departed swiftly and without protest. In the aftermath, the peace between the regions began to crack. The people of Ardwood were resentful of those from Tolabella for damaging their lands in the march to the coast. Those in Navanka felt undervalued, for though they didn't have as many warriors to offer, they were instrumental in devising winning strategies. And those in Tolabella thought that as the frontline fighters, they should be entitled to more of the spoils and were extremely displeased with having the enemy that they just spent a generation fighting now comfortably settled just a few nights north of their borders. Courbon, however, being closest to the initial visitant enclave on the shores when the invaders arrived, suffered the most fatalities and casualties. They blamed the magical creatures for not doing enough to protect them, wanting to make amends. The creatures of Earth began teaching Courbon how to wield the magics in order to strengthen their people and prepare the deep scarifications of war. However, as Courbon became more and more proficient in the mystical arts, their arrogance grew. They became convinced that they should be the rulers of all Javar. The only thing stopping them was the knowledge held by the creatures inhabiting the lands of their soul. Courbon sent their strongest defenders and most skilled at wielding magic to launch a surprise attack. Within a dozen nights, the defenders from Courbon slaughtered the thousands of great beasts, driving the Kongamado and Gabale to near extinction and nearly wiping out the entire population of Carcol and Farfadets. The creatures fought valiantly, but they were overwhelmed and unprepared for the vicious onslaught. Nearing annihilation, they brokered a conditional peace. In exchange for an end to the bloodshed, they would banish themselves to the mountains, where the terrain and climate were unsuitable for people. Courbon agreed to the terms. They returned home and called a meeting of all the peoples of Tolabella, Ardwood, and Navanka. They lied and said the creatures had grown fond of the visitants and attacked them, but the brave defenders of Courbon were able to banish the traitorous beings and protect the people in all the regions of Javari. Celebrated as heroes, the leaders of Courbon then established a strict social hierarchy known as the stratums to maintain power and order, and this is the way it was, and the way it continues to be. But a single truth still stands. Whatever has begun can also be undone. wonderful thing about that excerpt is that clearly there's a few mild references to actual events that may have occurred. You're going to hear some folks over the next few political cycles talking about like making certain countries great again. And I think a good counter to that, not to get political, is that like, has this country ever really been like great? I mean, we've been cool. We've definitely been like big, loud, expensive, oppressive. I don't know, great. Yeah. And so by borrowing that, but I feel like that puts a lot more weight to the fantasy by incorporating these elements outside of the Arthurian legends. And there's, again, nothing wrong with Arthur, nothing wrong with English folktales, nothing wrong with fantasy in general. I just feel like that by diversifying it. So building the idea of the stratums. I mean, there's some terms that you may have heard in there where you're kind of like, he's having a mild stroke, but he's pushing through it. Good for him, not good for me. Those words were intentional. So Queen Mother is an actual designation of respect. It was a position in a lot of tribes and a lot of cultures on the African continent where you were an elder, but you were a woman, because unlike certain more Eurocentric cultures, there are actually quite a few matriarchal cultures. And if you're not sure what a matriarchal culture is, picture like a patriarchal society that works. And that's kind of groovy. Yeah, sorry about that. I know I might be blowing a few minds or at least hurting some feelings. It's just true. Like, if guys were supposed to be the stronger of the genders, you know, then we wouldn't have fucked up as bad as we have. Am I wrong? No. That's not what this is about. This is about stealing from other cultures, appropriating as opposed to misappropriation, to share all of the good stuff that's in there. But that was gonna vanish. I don't want to read too much more because, like I said, they're short works. I write concisely because I grew up obsessed with Edgar Allan Poe, and the fact that you look at his career and he's so influential, he never wrote a novel. Everything he did was short form. He wrote a lot of short stories, some beautiful poems, and also I have a background in broadcasting. In the news, you have to be very concise. But what I did want to do is I did want to read an excerpt from another book, Big Ass Aliens, which, yes. So there's the thing about my titles. I tend to be a bit verbose. My first book was called Teleportality, which is a word I made up. My other book, I have a third book that was called The Preternaturalist, which is not like a made-up word, but it's a mouthful. And so I was, again, big nerd, I don't know if you can tell, but I grew up reading a lot of serials at the library, and not like the back of Post and General Mills boxes. I mean like serials, as in like sci-fi stories where you had to read one short book, you know, the next one, and the next one, and the next one. It's kind of like comic books with no pictures. They're very cool. And I wanted to write an homage to the serials that I used to read. My working title while I was doing it was called The Perspicacious Rise of Javari the Bold. Because I was like, yeah, nothing says alien invasion like a bunch of 50-cent words, right? That's the first thing you think. And a friend of mine was like, no, that's terrible, don't call it that. I was like, what do you mean? Perspicacious? That's a sexy word. She's like, no, you have a weird idea about sex. Can you say something about that words? And I said, okay, well, what should I call it? She said, well, I'll help you. What's it about? I said, well, there's these big-ass aliens. And she said, stop. That's your title. and because I'm an indie author, I was like, you know what? Fine. That is my fucking title. But when no one buys this book, it's all on you. You're gonna see it. And since then, this has been my most popular work. Like, I have gone there, like, I have great artwork, eye-catching displays, and people are like, oh, what's this black and white thing? Big-ass aliens, what's that about? And so the fun about Big Ass Aliens, though, is like, similar to fantasy, I wanted to write the stories I didn't see. Toni Morrison, the late great Toni Morrison, has a fantastic quote, which I'm going to paraphrase, because it's beautiful. Basically, if there's a story that you want to read that you can't find, you are obligated to write it yourself. Again, kind of dovetails nicely in that, like, put up or shut up. And one of the things I love about alien invasion stories is that they're like mashed potatoes. Even when they're bad, they're still kind of good, but they usually fall into one of two camps. Just like mashed potatoes, you've got like plain mashed potatoes, and then you got like the weird mashed potatoes. And like plain mashed potatoes can be like chunky. They can have like skins in them. They can have like chives, all kinds of good stuff. Plain doesn't mean like empty. It just means like, all right, standard. You got your thing. And then you got like the weird ones. Like anybody go to like a public school and like you had mashed potatoes, but for some reason it was more like the consistency of like cream of wheat. Like have this potato. It's like it feels like it takes more work to make a potato that than to just smash it and heat it up. Like they went out of their way to make it weird. And that's how I felt about alien invasion stories, that you had one of two camps. You had, we're here to conquer, or we're here to warn you. And like the first camp, there's a lot of great stories about We're Here to Conquer. H.G. Wells' War of the Worlds, classic for a reason. Then we got the opposite side, like the Day the Earth Stood Still, where it's like more about showing the folly of man. It's like, we're here to help. Stop fucking up your planet. And we're like, what? Fuck you! Blow them up! Because that's very, very American story, that was. With Big Ass Aliens, I was like, well, what if the aliens don't give a shit about us at all? Think about it this way. If you have the technology to traverse light years, galaxies, who knows, and you show up on this planet where we're still like grasping the concept that like gender doesn't mean what's in your pants, you don't want to talk to us. I mean, when we knock down the rainforest, well, that's really sad. I want to bring the house down. When we build anything, when you're walking from your front door across a lawn to save time instead of the sidewalk, you're destroying thousands of microbes, insects, right? You don't care about that. I mean, you do now, but you didn't then. So that's what the big ass aliens, they show up, they're fucking our stuff up, but they don't care because we're so insignificant. But I wanted to do it in the hyper-local lens of the Twin Cities, because I talk a lot of trash, but I really do love Minneapolis and St. Paul, and all the suburbs that haven't realized that really just Minneapolis or St. Paul, and they're kidding themselves. I mean, really, Richfield, come on, you're across the street. You're just South Minneapolis. And like St. Paul, sorry, you're the east neighborhood of us. And why don't your streets make sense? What the shit is that? It's up, down, left, right. No this circle stuff, no like 2 levels. Anybody here from St. Paul? What the fuck? What are you doing? And I realized reading a serial, not from the beginning, might make you a little bit lost, but this is just a small excerpt. And they kind of, just to give you a taste. And I like this idea, because I also want feedback. Because I think that if you read Big Ass Aliens, you'll dig it as well. And I'm gonna do this the right way. I'll do this like a proper author is supposed to. I'm like here, I'll use the little like 8th grade bandstand. No one asked me up here to play trombone, and I thought, this is it, I'm gonna be a rock star. Strangely, that's not the case. It did not happen. So this is an excerpt from Big Ass Aliens number 3, What We Are. Because serials always have like a subtitle that's supposed to lure you in. So does everyone feel properly lured or adequately lured? All right. Wabasha. I've been hungover before. I'm not talking like the kind of hungover you see in the movies where everyone just throws on a pair of sunglasses, downs a mug of coffee, and they're fine after a couple minutes. I mean, really hungover. Throbbing head, aching gut, the whole world spinning, legs feel like someone replaced my blood with overstuffed bags of wet sand. Even worse. Now, the last thing I remember was being lifted high into the air by one of those big-ass aliens. Credits. And the loud, painful buzzing rattling around in the space between my ears. It was all gone now. Not the pain, mind you. My head still felt like a dozen Little League kids used it for batting practice, but everything else. There was no big-ass alien, no weirdly trapezoidal head or tiny eyes staring at me, no loud buzzing between my ears. For the moment, it seemed I was safe. I calmed myself down and patted my chest and legs. I seemed to be in one piece. I stretched my arms and took a few steps. I couldn't see anything, but the ground was hard and the air was damp. I checked my pockets and pulled out my phone. Feeling around the edges, I found a little power button and pressed it. I sighed in relief when it blinked on. Not much power left, but the light from the wallpaper was just enough to cut through the darkness. With the dim light coming from my phone, I could just make out my surroundings. The walls were carved rock, but the floor was unnaturally smooth, probably concrete. There were fixtures hanging above, but what was left of the bulbs had been shattered. Jagged pieces of glass and tiny filament wires snuck out of the sockets. Tiny particles of dust filled the air, dancing around the limited range of my light. It seemed like I was at a junction point with many different passages branching out and fading out of sight, appearing to go on forever. The odds of me making it out of downtown earlier this morning, surviving direct encounters from both Husk and the big-ass aliens, were astronomical. I didn't want to spoil my inexplicable luck. If a passage collapsed or I found myself twisting and turning only to discover a dead end from which I couldn't return, it would absolutely be the end of me, and I couldn't risk exploring. You're awake, a small, confident voice called out. I turned towards the voice. A short, pear-shaped woman emerged from the shadows. Her thick gray hair was pulled back behind her ears, hanging messily about her shoulders. She moved cautiously, but every step was deliberate. Her long, worried face was illuminated by the soft amber light of the lantern she held in her outstretched left arm. It was hard to get a read on her age. Usually with older folks, I could ballpark it, but she was enigmatic. She could have been a youthful 60 or a world-weary 30. Her expression was soft but serious. A long, faint bruise slightly darkened her left cheek. Starting from the bottom of her ear, it arced diagonally across her nostril before curving up towards the corner of her eye. Even in the dim light of our surroundings, you could tell that this was a woman who had been through something rough. "Where am I?" I whispered. "What?" she replied loudly. "Where am I?" I asked again, louder this time. "Wabasha Caves," she replied matter-of-factly. "Well, what's left of them anyway?" "The Wabasha Caves?" "In St. Paul? How the hell did I get here?" "I don't know." "What do you mean?" "You were just here one day." I like the rocket, right? That's the effect. Like old lady, narrator, old lady, narrator. "I just appeared?" "I got word that someone was hiding out here in the long hall about 5 days ago. Said you were breathing but unresponsive. Not sure how you got here, but they said you were unarmed and in pretty rough shape, so we isolated the area and let you lie there. Figured maybe the marauders had got a hold of you." "Marauders? Don't worry about them." She raised her other arm into the light, revealing a long, homemade, jagged blade with ominous red and black stains along the edge. "I dealt with the last of those scavengers personally." "No, I was at a loss for words. None of this made any sense. Still, I didn't want to contribute any of my fluids to the stains in her blade." "You're welcome." "Right. Thank you." And I realized I kind of slipped Southern there for a second. I don't know, all old people are kind of Southern, right? A little bit, just a little bit. I took a deep breath and tried to speak calmly. "I don't remember any marauders. The last thing I remember was being attacked by one of the aliens." "One of those sky creature things attacked you directly, and you survived?" She chuckled in disbelief. "Yes, well, not really attack, it just picked us up." "Us?" "Yeah, me and Safala." "Who's Safala?" Her question was so simple and reasonable that it stuck a chord deep inside my gut. I wiped the tears from my eyes and swallowed hard, and that's when it hit me. I was alone. "Was anybody with me when you found me?" "Nope." "Well, you said someone told you I'd been here for 5 days, right? Maybe they found someone else, or maybe Safala could be in a different part of the caves?" "No, not possible. Sorry." "Well, how can you be so sure?" "Had to burn out the rest of the caves fighting the marauders. Lost all my people, but it was worth it. You and me are all that's left." I exhaled and surrendered. Over the course of my life, there have been many situations far beyond the scope of my control. I've become accustomed to acquiescing and leaning into apathy. Sometimes what it is what it is, and there's nothing to be done about it. And rather than waste my time stressing or worrying, I conditioned myself to put my head down and keep pushing forward. This was different. Safala had saved my life. Hell, she'd been saving my life way before those big-ass aliens invaded. I couldn't just forget about her. "You said we're in the Wabasha Caves." I stood up. "Yes." "Well, I need to get to Minneapolis." "Well, good luck with that." "Can you help me?" "Well, probably." "Will you help me?" "Probably not." "Well, why not?" "Well, I can't let it go to waste." "Let what go to waste? What are you talking about?" "Meat." Her eyes went wide and she lunged at me. Her screech echoed off the stone walls of the cave as she advanced, swinging the dirty but dangerous blade above her head. "What the hell?" I cried. "Why are so many folks gone feral so quickly?" So yes, an ongoing theme in the Big Ass Aliens serial is that once the Big Ass Aliens show up and start destroying the Twin Cities, it doesn't take much for the entire city, not entire, but most folks to like really lean into that. There's an encounter in the second chapter where they find refuge on the West Bank, and they encounter a little girl who's already got her post-apocalyptic armor, and he's just like, "What the hell? How are you doing this? What is going on?" Which is somewhat of a commentary in and of itself. I am actually an optimist. I know it's hard to tell from all the scary, terrible things I've been reading, but I do think that if shit hit the fan, holy crap, we would tear that fan apart, the blades of swords, and start murdering the shit out of each other. And by we, I mean like those scary people, not you guys. You guys are all fantastic. Okay. Ooh, look at that, perfect timing. I'm down to my last 10 minutes, at which I'm supposed to leave time for Q&A, or T&A, because there's no kids here. And my first initial is T, right? Anybody here have a name that starts with A? Look at that, T and A. I have delivered an NC-17 without taking off a single shred of clothing. You're welcome. But in all seriousness, are there any questions, comments, Feedback. I do like feedback. That's the one thing. I will say as like an indie author, or even in my other works and things like that, giving feedback, even bad feedback, is actually really, really cool. Like, what did you think? Was I too racist? Was I not racist enough? Did I say the F word too much on stage even though I never swear in my books? Was it? I did. I said the F word too much. And because it's really loud next door, if you don't mind. Oh, it's like Geraldo. Oh, I'm showing my age. Donahue? Okay, who's still with me? Hands up if you remember Ricky Lake. Okay. Geraldo had a talk show. Phil Donahue. Morton Downey Jr. Yeah, look at all those old people. Old people! Yeah. Sorry about that.
So the furry creatures, the farfadar, is that a creature that you made up, or is that like a common folklore creature in some culture somewhere?
Yes. So the question was, did I make up farfadets, or are they a common creature? They are a common creature. They tend to pop up in French folklore or Gaelic folklore, so along kind of like that western coast of Europe. The farfadets were sort of like the anti-fairies. So the fairies, depending on which country you're talking about, they were either like small, sprite-like, and kind of almost angelic, and then their flip side were the farfadets, who were like these sort of furry, hideous, ugly creatures that would steal your children, which was, I mean, from a scientific point of view, one of the good guesses is that, well, babies died a lot. And so instead of saying like, man, we don't know shit about science, our kids keep dying, they're like, no, it's not about science, it's because these monsters have been killing our babies. So, farfadets are real. Not real, but a real part of culture. Both farfadets are real. The same thing with, I mentioned like the Gabali. The Gabali is from Ghanaian culture in Ghana, and it's just basically a giant tiger with a man's face, which sounds super horrific, because like tigers are cute but dangerous. Tigers with man face is just dangerous. That's no good. And then of course, leviathans, which actually appear even in like Christian mythology, or sorry, the real science textbooks, depending on who's, I don't want to offend anybody, but yeah, there's leviathans in like ancient Christian writings and stories. They're basically like Nessie, but like bigger. Yeah, got another question.
I'm just wondering how many publications you've authored and what's coming next for you.
Thanks. So the question was, how many publications have I authored and what's coming next? So as far as fiction work, Big Ass Aliens #3 is my 10th offering, and overall, I'm not sure. My background was broadcasting and journalism, so I've written countless articles, even more news packages and stories and things like that. What's coming next is a story called The Cryogenic. That should be out in time for fall. Basically, it's my take on time travel, which, oh, I don't have a whiteboard. This would be great. If I can do my talk show instead. So most time travel, as we depict it and we think about it, is linear, meaning there's a present, there's a past, and there's a future. And then usually either you're starting here and you're going back here, or you're starting here, you're going up here. And then something goes wrong. Problem with that is that obviously if you go back here and do something, then what happens over here? That's a weird question. If you go over here, then you're out of place, those kinds of things. So I like to think of the stack method, which is that all time happens simultaneously all the time. There's nothing to go back to because it's already happened. And there's nothing to go towards because it hasn't happened yet. But in stacked time, it's sort of like a club sandwich. It's already happening. It's always happened. It's being created as we go. So the present, which only lasts for like a tiny fraction of a nanosecond, imperceptible. Because even right now, like, watch this. Everyone raise your right hand. Look, we've all traveled forward in the future 3 seconds. Time is cute, right? We're always traveling in time. So with stack though, now we can just kind of jump between the layers because it's happened, it just keeps happening. It's like a photograph. It's like a lot of photographs. So the problem with the cryogenic, he's figured out how to jump backwards because he wants to fix stuff. So a lot of my work has a pretty heavy socio-political spin. I have no idea why. What? I think it's crazy. But the idea is he's upset with what's going on. Like it's just gotten worse. We're talking like really bad. So he's like, I'm gonna go back and fix it. I'm gonna do that thing like linear time, where I'm gonna go back, I'm gonna fuck stuff up, and that way hopefully me mucking around like here will fix it in the future. Instead, he can't go forwards, so he's gonna use cryogenics, which is sleepy, to sleep his way to the future. And so he's kind of guessing and leaving himself vulnerable. I like to explore that, so I have everything outlined, and now it's about putting a line on the prose. Again, that should be out in the fall, the cryogenic tagline, what was, won't be. Or it's a lot of fun. I like writing a lot. It's so much fun. Yeah. Any others? Oh, we got time for a couple more. Right here up front.
Okay, so I'm seeing a picture and I see something that looks like the second book on the top. It's a little blurry. Dragon variation? Yeah. Oh, okay, there you go. All right, awesome. Can you tell me about that?
Sure. Like the title or the story or both?
Yes.
Excellent. Okay. So like I mentioned before, nerd. A lot of kids lettered in football, cheerleading, baseball, lacrosse. If they were really awkward, they'd letter in like cross country because they don't want to be around people. I lettered, this is 100% true, in chess. I love chess. And one of my favorite chess openings, that's how nerdy I am, I have a favorite, is the Sicilian opening dragon variation because it is an aggressive opening. Most chess openings are about trying to get dominance in the center of the board, you want to save your pieces and like work on strategy. The dragon variation says, fuck that. And it's about murdering everything you can, and that's how you win. And it's a beautiful, I've used that chess opening since like 96 or so. It's great. So that's where the title comes from. The story itself is a very, very, very naked allegory. It's about a woman named Sky. Actually, I can go back before that. I was buying groceries with my youngest, or well, she was young then, she's my oldest now. That's weird. My daughter, who was young and is no longer as young, we were buying groceries. And as little kids tend to do, she was just babbling in the back seat. And we got to a stoplight, she said, "Hey, Dad." I said, "What?" And she said, "If you bite a wizard, do you turn into a wizard?" And I said, "What?" Because we had not been discussing any of that. And I was like, "No, I think you're mistaking that for like werewolves or something. Well, that's cool." And Mary's like, "Oh man, what if every time you bit a wizard, you could like be a wizard for a little bit? That's kind of cool." But that was back in my hard sci-fi. I wasn't a fantasy guy. So instead of wizards, I was like, oh, I'll make this an allegory for like basically the entire African American experience. So the idea is that Sky, who was the main character of Dragon Variation, she works in the post-apocalyptic future, very tyrannical government, kind of paint by numbers so far. The difference is she is what's called a doyen. I do use a lot of French because I think it's a beautiful language. I can see all kinds of stuff and it sounds sexy as shit, and it's just garbage. So right? Like, you're a little wet, that's cool. All I said was, there's a big ant, he has a hat on his head. It sounds hot, right? Sounds really hot. As opposed to like, say, German, which is like really scary. It's like, oh, ich liebe deine Handschuhe. It's like, what the fuck? I like your gloves. Because Handschuhe is hand gloves. That is a nice hand shoes. That's the nice thing about German, right? It's like Legos. Anyway, back to the story. Sky is doyen. She is captured by the government where they basically keep them as actual shadows. So you've heard like how, like, yep, that's right, yeah, nice and comfortable. Let's get deep into that white guilt. The cool thing is that, so every time they sever meat from her legs or thighs, and like they feed it to their armies so that way they can gain her powers briefly. And then at first she just does so unknowingly, then she does so willingly, thinking that by cooperating she'll have it easier. Then she realizes like, no, I'm being exploited, decides, fuck all this, I'm gonna go. And she runs out. So the whole story is an escape attempt book, kind of a travel movie. Not as gross as McCarthy's on McCormick's The Road, but still kind of gnarly. And then the counterpoint, the antagonist, is Spencer, who works for the government. He has a stand-in not just for like systemic oppression and white supremacy, but also like the blasé attitude, because he believes that what he's doing is right, which goes to the, I'm gonna get really preachy all of a sudden, the best antagonists, if you are writing stories, usually I'm supposed to say, this is my opinion, no, this is fact. The best antagonists are the ones who are not bad. It's the ones who believe that they are doing the right thing. They're just going about it the wrong way. When you think about like a Magneto, like Gary Kushner, he's not the bad guy, he's the wrong guy. Because he's like, yo, mutants are being oppressed. Like, yep, like we need to stand up for ourselves. Yeah, we should murder all the humans. Whoa. And that's like the anti-villain. Those are good bad guys. And so I tried to make Spencer, who's the antagonist, a good bad guy. Like he's doing his job, not realizing that by doing his job, he's really just perpetuating and keeping the cycle going. And then, stuff happens, 3 acts. It's a Western story, so there's beginning, middle, ending. And then there's like a little bit about me in the back. Cover, free detail. Yeah, no problem. Also, play chess. It's a lot of fun. Go to chess.com. You can learn the Sicilian variation, the hot turkey opening, modern, Louis Lopez. It's a whole thing. And if you haven't seen Queen's Gambit, definitely watch that. It's a great show. It'll get you really hyped up about chess. Kind of like how in Halloween people start buying cats and they throw the cats away. Don't throw away cats. Cats are awesome. If you have a dog, throw that away. Get yourself a cat. They're like dogs, but awesome. Yeah, if you don't have a cat and you only have dogs, just think of like, what if this dog was awesome? That's what it's like having a cat. Or more realistically, having a dog is like having a roommate with a chemical dependency issue. They lick your face, they fall asleep anywhere, they lick other things in themselves, they eat garbage. That's a dog, or a bad roommate. Cats are like having like a really cool roommate that you're not really sure if you're friends or not. You're kind of like, you just met, it's like, oh yeah, we had a great night, we were hanging out on the couch, having a good time, and then this morning I like kept calling his name, he was ignoring me. Wouldn't talk to me at all, kept showing me his asshole, it was crazy. Yes. And I think there's time for one more, if anybody has any. Or if not, I can ask you all a question. What should I read? Because B.B. King, the blues guitarist, has this great message about musicians, where he only hires musicians who don't play blues exclusively, because the most boring music in the world is music inspired by the same kind of music. I think the same thing applies to writing. I read a lot of sci-fi, but I want to read more than that, because I think if I only read sci-fi and I wrote sci-fi inspired by sci-fi, that's really fucking boring sci-fi. What should I read? Recommendations, I only have one. Think Twilight Zone. Like, oh my God, I'm gonna walk out the doors and be stuck in a hotel room, and the only thing I have to entertain myself is this one book. No pressure. What should that book be?
Four Lost Cities by Annalee Newitz, nonfiction. I mean, tell you about it.
One more time.
Four Lost Cities by Annalee Newitz.
Excellent. Everyone writing that down. Four Lost Cities by Annalee Newitz. This is good for everyone. Yes.
Song for the Wild Bill by Becky Chambers.
Song for the Wild Bill by Becky Chambers. And got some like vouching snaps. That's a good one.
Any of the Caiaphas Cain novels from the Warhammer 40K universe.
Ooh. Is that military sci-fi?
Yeah.
Well,
But
it's kind of
also
science fiction thing with sea horror.
Yeah.
Nice.
Really dark setting. Really dark setting.
Do you like the dark stuff?
Yeah.
And last two.
I'm going nonfiction. So The Body is Not an Apology by Sonia Renee Taylor.
Excellent. Thank you. Ooh, and more. Got some vouching claps at times. Just like, fuck your snaps. This is how you do it.
If on a winter's night traveler in El Camino.
One more time, because all I got is like, Winterside Traveler El Camino.
Oh, okay. If on a winter's night a traveler, Italo Camino.
If on Winterside Traveler Italo Camino. Excellent. And that is a great title.
Yeah.
Synopsis, really quick, for everyone in the room.
Well, I was just say it's the only book I've ever read that's successfully written in second person.
Sold. Absolutely. That is awesome. That is time. Thank you all for spending this hour with me. I got copies. And actually, even if you're like, oh, I hate it when people do that whole step. I tried, speaking of Dragon Invasion, to do a comic book adaptation. I didn't finish it, because this is like an experimental thing. I'm not a comic artist, I can't draw for shit. But if you wouldn't mind, read it, and there's a little QR code on the postcard. If anyone's interested, just tell me what you think. That's the only compensation I'm asking for, is your opinion. And it's anonymous, so you can get really, really dirty if you want to. Or keep it clean, whatever it is, let's go.
Are you
Thank you,
gonna be
guys.
selling your books at some other later time in the con? Because I got a bunch of other events that I really want to make.
Yeah, I'm here all weekend. I have to check the schedule, sadly. Or actually on the schedule, if you just type in Cisco, it'll pull up everything, because I don't know off the top of my head.
Okay, so you'll be in other places where we can get the book?
Yes.